Hi, my name is Mariya, and I will be talking about expressways. And when I mention expressways today, I'm talking about freeway-like structures that often ran through city cores. So that's a little background for you. My proposition is that the current expressway teardown movement in America is in American cities is counterproductive. My claims are the urban teardown method lacks good design, it is unsustainable, and the strategy planning behind this movement, it will not necessarily alter people's behavior. According to New York University's Urban Design Department, with the fast growth of urban population, there has been an increased demand for a reliable, safe, and resilient aging urban infrastructure. Dr. Raymond Mole of the Department of History at the University of Alabama says that in our post-interstate era, cities are beginning to support highway programs that tear down inner cities' elevated expressways after describing as aging, unappealing, environmentally damaging, and dangerous. During the post-war period, the elevated expressways promised salvation from city blight, but today they are praised as a means for urban revitalization. When I say urban revitalization, I'm talking about land redevelopment in areas of moderate to high density, urban density use. This is where I'll state my first claim, that urban teardown methods lack good design. According to Dr. Ernest Sternberg, an urban planning scholar and one well-published author, good design reintegrates the human experience of urban form and acknowledges the non-commodifiability of the human experience within an urban environment. So basically what he's saying is that in order to be deemed good design, urban spaces must first recognize how people interact in the space. The teardown is an intentional overcompensation for past decisions, and tearing down expressways would pose a threat to millions of drivers relying on that space today. The teardown movement lacks good design because, according to Sternberg, it's not substantial planning or good design to simply tear down expressways and slap things over with a boulevard trench or mass transit band-aid. This leads me to my second claim. Not only do urban teardown methods lack good design, but they are also unsustainable. According to Thomas Campanella, historian of city planning, rapid urbanization and global patterns of labor capital are increasing globalization and the expansion of urban centers. So there's a lot of people who are moving back into the city. With this in mind, it would seem, but the United States continues to face the opposite problem. Whereas other countries are globalizing, the United States is not urbanized enough to be sustainable in the long haul. So it would seem wasteful in an under-urbanized environment to simply tear down expressways. Furthermore, according to Michael Newman, an associate professor of urban planning at Texas A&M, this says that the expressway teardown movement lends to the compact city fallacy. In contradiction to the expressway teardown movement, the compact city fallacy delineates this, that compact cities are neither an adequate or an essential condition for a city to be deemed sustainable, and attempting to make cities more sustainable only by using urban form strategies is simply counterproductive, hence the counterproductive nature of the urban expressway teardown movement. Moreover, according to Kati Rubini, director of civic projects, a planning firm, says that it is predicted that Southern California is one of the states, American states, that will not see any urban investment in ultra-new transportation infrastructures. Therefore, tearing down expressways is unsustainable over the long haul. This leads me to my final claim. Even if current urban teardown methods were considered good design and were more sustainable, this type of urban planning will not necessarily change people's behavior. Jesus Navidad, an urban planning student, says that designers can construct an entire boulevard as a sidewalk, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people will go for a walk. Same idea is true of the expressway teardown movement. Designers can tear down every expressway and turn it into a boulevard, a tunnel, a trench, but if the human experience of this area is not appropriate to it, for example, remote rural places or like car-dependent California, individuals will not necessarily take full advantage of the design. Instead, Dr. Newman, Associate Professor of Urban Planning, says that the comprehensive planning should explore all options to fix this problem. To conclude, in our post-interstate era, American cities are beginning to support highway programs that tear down the inner city elevated expressways. However, my proposition is that this current expressway teardown movement in American cities is counterproductive. My claims are that the design is not, the expressway teardown movement lacks good design, it is unsustainable, and the strategy behind the planning will not necessarily alter human behavior. Though in some instances, tearing down an old expressway is the better, safer alternative to the problem at the time, inherently the teardown movement builds on a 100-year-old planning tradition and is not formulating futuristic outlook on the strategy. 20 years from now, expressways, trenches, tunnels, boulevards, and even mass transit will also likely become obsolete, just as the elevated expressway are now perceived failures of past transportation policies. Thank you.
All right, well, the presentation, I'm going to make a couple of references here to the outline. The presentation's a lot clearer than the outline was the first time I saw it. I thought you did a good job simplifying the claims and making it more effective as a speech. I especially thought that points 1 and 3 made a heck of a lot more sense. I still have a problem with the second point on sustainability because I think that there's a lot of language in there that is abstract in nature and is difficult to figure out exactly what you're talking about. I did believe at the beginning that the quotes, the first couple of quotes that you used before you got to the main points, did a nice job of setting up where there is a controversy and why we're talking about those kinds of issues. I did think, however, that there needed to be a little bit more information to demonstrate that these tear-down plans are either being considered or they're being enacted in places where you think it's problematic. For instance, you mentioned Southern California on one of the points, and I'm thinking, where the hell are we tearing down anything like that? And that's a good place for an example to illustrate the point that you're talking about, so it would make a heck of a lot more sense. Like I said, I thought that the first point, you kind of explain it pretty well. You've got an example here, not an example, but an explanation about what's going on. You have a lot of authorities that you're quoting. Authorities, when they're talking to each other in the language of their own disciplines, often have a tendency to speak in a way that sounds great in a convention of urban planners and sounds like gobbledygook to everybody else. And I think that we got a little bit of that, but I did think that ultimately you tried to explain it pretty effectively, so that makes it work a lot better. I got lost on that second point. Like I said, you came in with this compact city fallacy, and I'm going, okay, so what does this compact city fallacy mean? Who is following this? Is this a program or an assumption that people are making that we're now making choices based on, and it's a false premise that we're operating on? Making that practical and understandable, I think, would be really helpful. If more illustrations, I think, would make this point more comprehensible to the audience. There was one quote in there, and it was, there's also a reference to kind of a statistic where it talks about the United States cities are not, we're not urbanized enough to have this. And I'm going, we're not urbanized enough to do. I'm not exactly sure. I guess that means that we aren't covered with concrete everywhere. We're only covered with concrete where people live. That seems to me like one of those. There's a presupposition there that also needs some explanation. I thought you did a good job, like I said, citing the authorities that you had, and you're pretty good about giving the sources on all of that. The things that I think are problematic are lack of examples and some statistical information that shows, for instance, what percentage of tear downs are going on. How, when you talk about sustainability, what is it that's in those cities that's not going to, we're not going to get additional jobs, or there's not going to be enough tax revenue, or people aren't going to move there enough in order to make it worthwhile. It's going to, we're not going to get the savings, whether it's energy savings or transportation savings or whatever it is that people think that these tear downs are going to help us do, that we're not going to get those kinds of things. That's where you need some hard data rather than just the kind of esoteric statements of your urban planners. So I think that you explained it a lot more effectively than I was worried about. That helps. And I thought that you had, like I said, good authorities, but I think you need some other information to make the argument clearer and also more convincing. All right, thank you.